How's it going, everybody? I'm Ronald Jr. and today we're going to be talking about guitar strings. Now, I wanted to sound like Jimi Hendrix, so what I went and did was bought a set of Jimi Hendrix guitar strings and strung them up with my Stratocaster. And let me tell you something, I didn't sound anything like Jimi Hendrix. So you can go ahead and scrap that theory. So this is all over the internet right now. And I've always spoke out about this, but a lot of people always shut me down. And finally people are getting on board with this. And there's this theory, just like tone wood. A lot of people think that wood has a big part of sound in a guitar, and it really doesn't, unless you're playing an acoustic guitar. And another theory that they bring in is your strings, the gauge of strings, not necessarily what the strings are, but the gauge of the strings. And if you want to play like Stevie Ray, you gotta get a set of 13s and a set of 12s. And coming up as a guitar player, a younger guitar player back in the day, I'd hear people talk about that kind of stuff, and I'm like, okay, that's how he got that Strat sound. That's how he got that cool sound, right? And I'm like, I gotta play like him. I gotta set up my guitar like him. I gotta get strings like him. So what I did was studied how he set up his guitar, because Stevie Ray's my favorite guitar player. What ended up happening was my hand was getting fatigued. Sometimes it would go numb, and sometimes my hand would hurt. Not necessarily my fingertips, but my hand in here would hurt trying to play 13 gauge strings. And I do have a heavy hand, and one thing I did like about it, the strings didn't break as often as they do with 9s and 8s, right? So, and if I'd play 9s or 8s, I would overbend a lot, because I just have like that heavy hand, and just wanting to bend and destroy the guitar. I have an aggressive playing habit. So I went ahead and bought 11s. We dropped down to 11s. They were a little bit easier to play, but my hand was still hurting, right? And this was on a Stratocaster style guitar. And this was before I knew how to set up a guitar, the pickups and all that stuff, because a lot of people think that to sound like your favorite guitar player, let's take Stevie Ray for an example, is we have to have a vintage guitar, we have to have his strings. But that's not true, because those guitars were new then, and the sound doesn't come from the strings when it comes from Stevie Ray. It actually comes from the pickups aging and getting weaker. My favorite Stratocaster has Alnico 2s in it, and it sounds identical to Stevie Ray. And let me tell you something, I have 10 gauge strings on there, and they actually sound beefy and thick. It has nothing to do with the string gauge, for sure, trust me. And once you get this in your mind, you will have a better understanding and you can play comfortably. I like a little bit of a fight back with my guitar. That's why I play with a little bit higher action. But one thing I did notice, once I switched to 10s, I can play a lot more smoother. I can play for a lot longer. My hand's not fatigued. It's not hurting now. I can play the guitar comfortably and happy and have a good time. And guess what? I sound just like I did with 13 gauge, 12 gauge, 11 gauge strings. So I'm using 10 gauge strings now. I can't use 9s and I can't use 8s because I just have too heavy of a hand. Even though that I can control my bending, I just have too much of a picking hand, or too aggressive picking hand, and what that does is I pop strings all the time, and it's unacceptable. I can't be doing that. So I play 10s. Sometimes I'll switch from 10s and a halves. You're playing a guitar live, the last thing you want to have is hand fatigue, hand cramping up, soreness. That's what I was running into when I was playing with, a guitar with, 12s, 10s, 11s, or 11s, 12s, and 13s on it. Your hand, playing live, after a while your hands get tired, and you're trying everything you can to keep going, and you just can't wait to that next break. That's all you're looking forward to, is a break, a 5-minute break or a 2-second break, whatever, a break in something, because these things are so hard to play. And once I figured out that you can put any set of strings on your guitar and still sound the same, now that I'm using 10s, I have a really good time playing guitar live. And I think we get things embedded in our mind from the internet and from what people say, and we take that like it's a religion. Just like neck shims, I could hand you a guitar that sounds amazing until I'd tell you there was a neck shim in it. You would automatically be like, okay, that guitar's junk because it's not made right. Because that's what you've heard. That's what you've heard on the forums. That's what you've heard from guitar builders. That's what they say to sell things, okay? There's a selling pitch for everything in this world, and you know, you gotta sell a guitar, so you're gonna make it sound as good as possible and exaggerate it. So when it comes to guitar strings, try different gauges, because you are going to have a different strumming hand and a different bending hand, and a different chording hand. My problem with 9s and 8s is I overbend, I have a heavy hand, and my grip on the neck is a little bit harder than most, so I end up putting the notes sharp. I can't play 9s because it's a disaster. So I have to play 10s or a 10.5. That way I can control what I'm doing and still play comfortably. So before you do all these things to your guitar to make it play comfortably or stuff like that, change your strings. If you're having a problem playing licks, you just feel uncomfortable and you might blame it on the guitar, change your string gauge and see where you go from there, because I am so glad that I've switched to 10s. I never thought I would say that. I would argue with people, but like, you got to get those fat beefy strings to get that fat tone. Dude, I've seen people, there's many musicians, famous musicians, that use 8s and they sound like they got 13s on the guitar. So it's all a myth, and you know, I don't believe it. Leave your feedback in the comments below on what kind of strings you play. You know, what do you think about that? Let's have an open mind here. Let's not argue in the comments. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Make sure you give it a thumbs up. I'm Ronald Jr., and I'll see you guys next time.